everyone, and welcome to today's GT News webinar entitled Twisted Bank Relations, Achieve Transparency, Optimize Processes. My name is Trika Adams, and I will be your host for today. Our two speakers are Martin Potzweiler, Global Product Manager at CIS, and Tom Hunt, Director of Treasury Services at the Association for Financial Professionals. Before we begin, there are a few housekeeping points. If you have questions for the speakers, please type it into the box on the lower right-hand corner of your screen in the Q&A panel. We will use these questions during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please ensure to send all of your questions to all panelists, otherwise we may not be able to read it out loud. Additionally, this webinar is being recorded, so if you missed anything or think a colleague would be interested, you will be sent a link to access the recording in the next few days. I'd now like to hand you over to our first speaker for today, Mr. Martin Potzweiler. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today, Martin.
Yeah, hello everybody, and thanks for the warm welcome, Terika. I'm really happy to join you in this, join everybody in this webinar. It's my first English webinar, so I hope I'm going to make it through until the end. And I'm also really happy to have Tom Hunt with me as a real expert on this topic. So yeah, hello Tom as well. And the idea is to have a joint, or to show you a joint presentation on this topic, and we are in the middle of the presentation, hand over the presenter mode to Tom to have his view on this, and then we'll continue again. And please feel free to type in any question you would like to cover at the end, and we'll try to manage as we go, after we have finished. So if we go through this topic, maybe to give an overview of what it's all about. This is the main topics we'd like to talk about. Of course, we won't make every detail, every topic on this list, so we thought about the main things we would like to touch today. So I'm going to first give you a little background about myself, and then go through the banking landscape and the cultural change that's been taking place, and also show you the first steps how to achieve transparency in the banking side and cash management. And then, of course, the main part, or a big part of this is the AFP with their global service codes that help treasurers to achieve that transparency and also help banks to provide good service to their customers. And if we have time at the end of this, I would also like to say a few things about EBAN, as we see quite some increase and quite some demand on this topic lately. So maybe we have time to also cover that. And yeah, of course, we'll also hopefully get a little outlook, what's next, and what's the next steps for everybody. About myself, I just recently joined TIS here in Germany, and I used to work for a large European airline before that, and that's where I met this, or where I touched this topic. And my first task in my old job in Treasury was to renegotiate the global pricing, cash management pricing for the US. And when I first came there, I had no clue whatsoever about cash management and nor about the US pricing, and I asked for an old price list. So my colleague gave me this little booklet, I think it was 25 pages of price items I should negotiate with our main bank in the US, and I really couldn't believe what I was seeing. So luckily we only used, I don't know, a couple of hundreds out of these almost 2,000 price items with that bank, so this made it a little easier. But then I also noticed that there are some AFP codes on the side of this price list, and I went to the bank and asked for some details, for some explanation about those AFP codes. And then this whole topic started and took off, and I also found out that our other main bank is also providing a similar thing for Europe. So, and then, yeah, this whole thing started rolling, and I tried to form a little working group with other treasurers to support each other and tell our banks that we need this, and also show the banks that this is a business case and a solution that's valuable to their customers. So that's a little background where it all started for me. I know we're going to hear from Tom a little bit more about his background and the background of this topic, which is a little older than just a couple of years, but that's for a start. And then after 4 years or 5 years in Treasury at the airline, I went to new challenges here at TIS, which is a new company and SaaS-based, software as a service-based solution vendor here in Germany, and it was founded 3 years ago. And right now we see ourselves, or we are seen as the leading cloud platform in the corporate payment sector, also with solutions for liquidity management, and also, which is important for today, the bank relations side. So these are the main topics we cover at the moment. And as you might know, I guess the people in the US are much more familiar with the SaaS topic than many others here in Europe, which is interesting to see that is now picking up in Europe as well. So the SaaS topic, which means that you can quickly install and implement software without any upfront cost, investing cost. And yeah, this is the topic is beginning to get a little more attractive here as well now in Europe. So that's where we position ourselves. And I don't want to go into too much detail about that, because we are here to talk about the transparency in the banking customer corporate relationship. So that's just to give you an idea about our little company. If you want to have more information about it, just email me. You have our email contact in the back of the presentation, so feel free to contact me. As we talked about this cultural change, I mean, there's a huge bank in Germany which is promoting that cultural change in the banking industry for a couple of months, or maybe 1 or 2 years now. And this is a perfect opportunity to dive into that topic, because I personally think this is quite, after the financial and the financial crisis, this is a perfect opportunity for banks to show that they are improving and learning from their mistakes. So cultural from their mistakes. So cultural change. If we see it, if you look at it, why is this so important? Because in the old days, or in the old world, there were some things, especially if it comes to a corporate bank relationship, that were not too well. They could have been or could be improved. So I noticed, or I collected some statements from the old world, so to say, to see and to check if the cultural change is really needed, and we're going to see quite in a minute that it is. Because many bank colleagues told me a few years ago that cash management revenue is only a small percentage of their global revenue, so they didn't really show any interest to bother about it. And then if I look at the current numbers, which I found in a study by Boston Consulting a couple of months ago, that the transaction side of the banking revenue is quite large. So these two quotes kind of conflict. So there is no real how do you say this? There are different views on this topic. So let's maybe put it this way. So this is something that needs to change, and I think that also the transaction banking side, which might have been neglected in the past, needs more attention on the bank corporate relationship. And also another thing, if we go to the TWIST topic, TWIST is going to be explained later on as well by Tom. It's a transaction for a Workflow Innovation Standards team who played an important role in the transparency in the bank, the electronic billing side. TWIST was, in the old world, wasn't seen as a business case. I heard this from a bank colleague, I think 4 or 5 years ago. Literally, he said, TWIST, electronic billing, it's not a business case for us, we don't bother. In the meantime, the same bank now goes to big, large corporations and offers the service from their own or by themselves. So they actively contact corporates about this topic. So this is a change we're going to see later on as well. And the fourth quote, just to show you how it was in the past, from my experience, I really heard this saying by a banker that TWIST wouldn't be important for him because his customers would trust this bank. And of course, trust is a real important, it's a pre-requirement for a relationship. That's absolutely sure. But that does not mean to be negligent on the billing side and just not to bill anything, or just to be not really clear about what is being billed and how much it is. So trust is nice and it's important, but it doesn't exclude you from doing the main basic principles I see that are important for a relationship with the corporate. So that's where I start. And also the corporate side, they also haven't been in the topic, at least that's my experience in Central Europe over the last years, that they said, oh, this is too much effort checking the billing, and it's all in the system already. Why do I have to check the invoice afterwards? It's small numbers. And others even said that they don't even pay any bank charges, which is quite funny because, I mean, of course they pay it somewhere, even if it's covered in float or other hidden fees. But that's the old world again. I noticed, and I collected these statements from my last 5 years of experience. And then also the IT budget is always a topic, because if you say there is a solution that covers this topic and that helps you receive better service and helps you to improve your relationship, they always say, many people said, oh, I don't have any IT budget. My resources have to cover other topics that are more important. So this is also a thing that happened quite often in the past. And then, yeah, others said, okay, we only take care about the main big issues. We don't bother about small numbers. And I guess those voices are still in the market, but they are changing now. But we are going to see that later on. Oops, sorry. So to come back to the challenges of a treasurer in the subject of bank charges, and this is just the stripped down version of my slide. In the download version afterwards, you're going to get the full-blown slide with an explanation and much more text. I just wanted to stick to the main basics and explain everything, and then and not to distract you from listening. So this is the idea, because this is a typical scenario we have here, that we have many banks that provide invoices and bank charges in many different ways, and you don't really know. And if you sit in the headquarters or in the central treasury department, you have no clue whatsoever what's going on. And even the payment, the way of payment is different. Some fees are debited directly to your account. Others just show up on the account statement. Some services are paper invoiced. For example, in Germany or in Europe, I think it's in Europe anyway. If some bank services are tax-free, others are not. So for the tax-free services, you don't get an invoice sometimes, and for the tax services, you get an invoice for your tax declaration. So this is all a mess, to make it simple. At least it used to be. And so the challenges for the treasurer are quite obvious, because again, they don't see what's going on either on the cost side, but also on the process side. Because if most treasurers I know, they have a policy globally, for example, to avoid any fax transactions without any 4i principle. But if you don't see all the bank accounts in a central system and don't have the processes, you don't know if that's being applied. But with the central billing, we will see later, you can see if a manual transaction has been made in that specific subsidiary somewhere in the world. So this is something that's also important. The cost side and the process side again. And for countries like the US, where there are many price items, it's impossible to verify the bank fees accurately, because there are so many, and it doesn't make sense to have an employee sit down and go through the many hundreds of items every month and check if they are correct. I mean, that's of course ridiculous to do. So that's something that's really, yeah, also a challenge. And then what comes with that is that if you negotiate a pricing with the bank, you don't know exactly what you're talking about from a corporate perspective. So you don't know how much, where the big chunks are in your invoice, what size of wallet the bank has in your overall relationship. So it's all a matter of manual work to find that out and to get information about that. And also, what I found out was really frustrating at times, when my management came to me in preparation of a management meeting with some bank managers. They wanted information about the details about this relationship with the bank. And I could also only say, okay, sorry, I can only guess. I can give you some numbers, but they're not accurate. They're not substantial. And it was really, something that was really, frustrating, I guess is the right word. Because you didn't have the information globally at hand. You could only check a few things on your central system, but not every company in the group was connected to their system. So it was all really not available for a central view. And also, as I learned, many auditors told me that this could also raise some compliance issues. I guess the colleagues in the US know about Sarbanes-Oxley. That's a big issue there, I heard. So there's also something that's beside the cost aspect of this topic. And if you go further and think about it, and we would like to ask a first question to the audience, maybe you're willing to participate. I mean, I would like to know if you are willing to share the information about how big your audit of bank fees is. I mean, what I've just said, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you don't know it exactly. So don't be shy. Feel free to admit it, because you won't be the only one. And then also, if you can estimate the number, it would be interesting to see what kind of what the percentage of each portion is here, and to see the size of the audience, or whatever. I mean, I guess it's quite clear what we would like to know, and because the idea behind that we'll show later and explain later. Tom, are you still online?
Yes, I'm here.
Perfect.
I think the size of the wallet or the bank fees is going to be dependent on a couple things. Obviously, the size, breadth, and depth of the company, how big they are globally, the industry that they're in. So if they're in the retail industry, they're going to probably have a different mix of bank fees versus, say, an insurance company who's going to have a lot more different fees. And so I think even if you look at those two main drivers as being the key components here, I think we'll expect to see some different results. But I mean, I wouldn't venture to say that a lot of companies don't know exactly, because I think just as you were talking about, it's not always relevant, or it's not always transparent, I guess, is the better word for it. So.
Yeah, and so if you now see the result, that's exactly what we have expected. So it's interesting to see that this seems to be the case. I mean, I also know that, well, I guess there are some bank colleagues in the line as well. So I don't know how they answer this question. This was just for the corporate side, of course. But anyway, so almost half of the audience doesn't really know exactly what's going on. And that, again, doesn't surprise me, because I've been there. I mean, I know exactly how that feels, and I know, of course, I think at least in Europe, where we have a different system than in the US, I think this is common, and I guess if we would do the same survey just in Europe, it would be much higher for the last answer. Okay, but thanks again for your participation. So we'll move on and see what's next. I mean, trying to click here, but oh, there you go.
All right.
So this is now your part, Tom. I mean, a warm welcome again, and thanks again for joining me, because this is perfect if we have the expert on the twist and AFP side with us here as well, because this is an important issue, and then perfect that we have some background as well.
Sure. So thanks, Martin. Just a little bit background about me. I'm the Director of Treasury Services at the AFP. Primarily cover all topics related to Treasury cash management, but actually bank fee analysis is one of those topics that's near and dear to my heart for the very reasons that Martin talked about. And in my prior position, I was at a company in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, 3M company, and we had quite an expansive operations overseas, and we had a large amount of bank fees, but to get our arms around it was always a big task. And so what I'd like to do is maybe take a dive into looking at some of the tools that you can use, explain what kind of the history of them, and then I'll go into the twist and the BSB as well. But essentially, starting in the U.S., if we look at where things came from, we've been doing electronic reporting here for at least over 20 years, using the ANSI 822 standard. I think when a lot of companies talk about getting their bank fees, they're asking for an 822 file. It's a standard that we've sponsored since 1986. We've had our AFP service codes here in the U.S. Since then. There are a couple different vendors that support the service codes, but there really are two major ones. And over 90 banks and growing produce account analysis statements electronically in that format. Some banks will also provide them in a PDF format, or some banks do analysis. They've got some tools and capabilities built into their portals to do that. But the majority of them are able to send an A22 file, which is a pretty standard format. And a lot of the banks actually use their own proprietary software. They'll use purchase systems or outside vendors that provide the system. So when you work with your bank, understand that they might not necessarily be the ones generating those files. That might be coming from outside vendors. So what their capabilities are going to be able to do are going to be somewhat dependent on what their vendors and their internal systems can do. It's a very standardized process within U.S. companies. To get an A22 file in, you pull it into your system software. This is the electronic side of things. In my world, when I was doing analytical work at the companies I worked for, I sat down and did it manually. So I would compare my analysis statements versus our contract and actually just look line item by line item. It was a huge time investment. Did it pay off? Yes. I think there was a lot of things that I was able to find, a lot of questions to go back to the banks on and ask about clarification. Just understanding what line items were, what services we were using, that type of thing. But the electronic side of the account analysis is very well proven in the U.S. And again, it's been around for a long time. So as we look to expand those service codes, one of the strengths of the 822 file is using the AFP service codes alongside of any bank proprietary service codes. So a lot of times you might see account analysis statements, like Martin, you talked about it. You get service codes alongside maybe an internal bank billing code, and that might not be as relevant because you can't compare that side by side against other banks. But the AFP service codes were created to work within the framework across a lot of different banks. So it really, it allows for a comparison of those charges to categorize and aggregate across different banks. And one of the challenges that we find, and I continually find, is that a lot of the banks will use the service codes a little bit differently, so you have to understand how they're using it and really where that level of data and understanding is in the description of the service code itself, along with how the bank is defining their proprietary service code. So really understanding what is that service line item that they're using. The TWIST BSB, which I'll cover here in a little bit, also accepts both proprietary and the second standard of codes, so with the service codes that we have on the global side. I think more traditionally the service codes are US-centric, and I'll cover that in a little bit when we get into the global ones. But in the past, I think, and one of the challenges as we look to the global service codes is, I think as we see the banks that will be providing them or are providing them, they haven't been using them in the past, and now they're able to, now that we've got standards in place, not just in the global service codes, but actually in the ISO standard. So that leads us to the AFP global service codes, and we were approached on this probably in about 2007, 2008, to really try and identify those service codes or come up with a standard for the services that banks are providing on an international level. Now what we did find is, I think we took our US-centric hats with us and we put those on and we looked at the international services that banks are charging, and it's not a direct match. And so what we had to do is we worked together with 13 banks, a couple different vendors, and a couple large corporations to create the service codes. And AFP, through a work with Bridget Meyer, who some of you might know, provided our technical resource, and she worked on that project with us. And essentially what we came up with was working with the task forces, we came up with service codes that identified probably 80 to 90% of the bank billing codes for the most part, and we produced those in 2011. We've since done an update out on the service codes as well, so there's more things that we've captured. It allows us being the industry to speak the same language with the banks across the different regions that they cover. And the service codes really do cover mostly European, but Asia Pacific, some Middle East and Africa services as well. So it enables banks to respond to global RFPs. Likewise, we envision it to enable corporates to put together global RFPs and ask for standardized pricing using their service codes. There are some differences in the U.S.-based, the EDI codes versus the global codes. The global codes are 8 characters and contain alphanumeric characters. The U.S. codes are all, for the most part, are all numeric codes, and they're 6 digits. The global codes, we've got about 940 of them versus the 2,800 in the U.S. We've both essentially updated them in 2013. The U.S. we just updated just announced them here in the last month or so, so those are very fresh. A couple different things between the U.S. and the global service codes. In the global codes, we definitely cover SWIFT in much more detail. We cover payment portals, SEPA, pooling services, notional and multi-bank pooling, and payroll cards. We cover payroll cards in the U.S. codes as well, but those are some of the newer codes that we just published and are some of the areas that highlighted just that are slightly different than the U.S. codes. But with these codes, both in the U.S. and the global codes, they're only as good as those who use it. And so, and likewise, any standard you could say that for. And as our codes get much more utilized and corporates are asking for them from their banks, or they're asking them in an RFP format, we hope to see more utilization of them. I mean, there's definitely a benefit to both the bank and the client to have them. I think it leads to better bank relationships for the bank to understand where their clients are coming from. Clients are able to do a better share of the wallet analysis, to be able to put that into a scorecard, to work with their bank, to identify areas. And like Martin said, just to be able to explain how much bank spend that they're doing, when you have a bank relationship meeting, it's important to identify internally how much you're spending, where you're spending it, what countries you're spending it with, and the products that you're utilizing with them. It's always good to have that review, if not annually, maybe semi-annually or quarterly. It all depends on the relationship and how much cash management services that you're utilizing. So with that, with the global service codes, we're going to talk a little bit about the bank services billing, or the BSB standard. Think about the BSB as the 822 standard in the U.S. It's an international standard for banks to report service charges, essentially. It's an XML format. It's developed by TWIST, which is also known as the Transaction Workflow Innovation Standards team. It's made up of a group of, similar to like our task force. It's made up of key industry participants such as software vendors, brokers, banks, corporates. It was designed to basically put together standards around the bank services billing. It's supported by large global and regional banks, and it can be processed in available software. And there's 5 or 6 vendors out there that do provide that support. But more importantly, it's providing value to corporates, because it is the standard for the FILIB itself, and it helps to understand and give more transparency into bank fees globally. So here's a list of the BSB Participation. This is as of September. There's 13 banks that are live. I think as you look down this list, if I look at, from the U.S. standpoint, we've got 3 of the 4 major U.S. global banks. We've got Citi, B of A, and J.P. Morgan represented. Likewise, a lot of the European banks are here as well, which probably covers Europe pretty well. I think where we can see a little more penetration going forward is probably maybe in the Asia Pacific, Africa regions. But this, participation is only moves along as much as corporates are asking their banks for it. So if you see your bank in this list, definitely ask them about it. And if you don't see your bank in this list, inquire with your bank to encourage them to become part of this participation. So diving a little bit further into the BSB. The BSB is designed to work with the ISO standard and the CMT 86 file. Not to get too technical, but essentially the 3.1 has been recast to work with the ISO standard. It was done in conjunction with Swift and Twist. It was a team that put together that updated standard done by 12 banks and 5 vendors. If you want more information on the ISO 20022 standard, you can go to this website here. I think essentially the CMT 86 file is pretty much the same as the version 3.1 file, but the only difference is it's to conform to the ISO standard. So from the perspective of if you're a corporate, what do you have to do? I think it's more on the onus of the banks to reprogram the BSB format to the new CMT 86 file. I think as new banks come on, they'll probably just update it for the CMT version instead of the 3.1 version. I think the banks that we listed earlier will probably add the CMT file as well to this 3.1 offering. A lot of this will get sifted out in the different software versions that companies are using. So I think from a corporate standpoint, it'll be less. It'll be more behind the scenes. The corporate vendor software from the different vendors has, and here it says needs to be upgraded, but from the Twist BSB newsletter that I read and talking with Paul Burstein, who works with the Twist BSB, most of the vendors are already ready and can handle both versions. Really, like I said before, the impact to the corporates and to the corporate audience should be pretty minor. The software will handle the differences. And there's also, with the update to the standard, there's documentation to provide a mapping to convert the one file from the other for further support. So as we move forward and continue to move forward, I think looking at global account analysis, is that the reality? And absolutely it is. I've been working on this in some form or another since 2006 when I met the gentleman. I met Paul and Dennis that were working with GE at the time, and I was at 3M at the time, and they were just introducing this concept. And here we are, 7 years later, we've got standards in place, and we've got service codes in place now. And essentially, corporates still want some things going into the future. And for large corporates, they want to be able to report all their cash management feeds, either in the U.S. or in the BSB globally. They want to be able to report monthly balances in the BSB. I think for companies based in the U.S. that have foreign bank account reporting requirements, this is going to become even more critical. There's a $10,000 threshold that they have to monitor against as part of that regulation. So that's important. That's from a U.S. multinational perspective. However, that could be for global multinationals as well. I think for corporates that move to invoicing rather than direct debiting of accounts, I think that it's going to depend on the cycle within which they are invoiced. Is it monthly? Is it quarterly? It all depends on working with your bank, but definitely the direct debiting of the accounts and reviewing the invoice or reviewing the analysis statement after the fact is a little more time consuming, especially if you need to recoup some of those fees.
Absolutely.
Moving to fee-based versus float-based bank compensation. Anytime you move to a fee-based environment, you're seeing a little better transparency in your fees, so corporates will want that going forward. And then the next two are really kind of two important items. I think the collecting fees by reducing wire proceeds or grossing up wires for debit or separate debit at time of wire, along with lifting fees, are primarily two of the biggest areas that we hear about, probably more so around the lifting fees and wires. As currencies get converted, each bank along the way seems to take a chunk out of it a little bit, and by the time they reach the beneficiary, the amount could be significantly different or minorly different in some cases. But it causes a lot of heartache with a lot of corporates, just because if they're trying to send a payment for an amount and it ends up being something different, they have to work out that on an exception basis. So again, just reporting on a monthly versus quarterly basis, working with your bank on what you can do and what it's capable of doing is going to be important going forward as well. So that leads us to our second polling question. And the question is, do you already receive electronic invoices or reports from your banks? That can be the 822 or that can be the BSB files. The answers are U.S. only, USA and Europe. Globally, no, not at all. I'm thinking about it, or I don't know exactly. And, I think the answers to this will probably flow along with kind of where they see some of their bank fee transparency issues, and to the extent that their banks are able to send those files as well, will influence the answers as well. But Martin, when you worked in at the airline there, were you striving to get more of your invoices and reports globally, or did you go after a certain region, or what was kind of your approach?
Well, I was kind of lucky, and then it's no secret. I mean, it was for Lufthansa Airlines, and we had mainly only a handful of core banks which provide this service for many countries in the meantime. So when we started with the U.S. and Europe, and then over time we expanded that to many other countries. So and the idea was, before I left, and my colleague who took over is doing the same thing, to try to get a global overview, of course, and especially if a company has a global presence like an airline, it's essential to know what's happening in the respective countries. So the result is interesting to see that really one quarter doesn't really have an overview, or doesn't really receive invoices electronically. I thought it would have been more. Actually it's a good sign. It's only a quarter, I would say. So
yeah, and I think a lot of it is paper driven still in some aspects, and certainly it also depends on where you centralize your bank fees. So if you have a centralized ledger number for your bank fees that the company can use, there's more transparency into that. But then there's it all depends too on the extent and breadth and depth of a relationship, and how your treasury is structured. If it's central or decentralized, that's going to lend its hand into some of this as well.
So we have to work on this. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so I'll turn it back over to you, Martin.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tom, for your explanation. It's really helpful to get the background about this, because I guess not many, or many of the attendees didn't have all the information available if they haven't touched this in the past. So, and yeah, we have to work on those 5% and the other 70% that are not thinking about receiving electronic invoices. Oh no, that's more than that. Anyway, but that's the idea, to convince corporates to go to their banks and ask for the service, because it's there for many countries in the meantime, for 13 global banks. That covers quite a lot of countries in the meantime. So yeah, I only can encourage treasurers to contact their bank partners. And if we try to sum it up, what Tom just explained, it looks like I'm just trying to, oh yeah, there you go. If you happen to remember the first slide with the challenges, where all different kind of invoice flowed from banks to different subsidiaries and group entities, the idea with the global service codes or with the electronic billing would be to have a central flow to a vendor, which, I mean, of course, I would suggest my company, but this shouldn't be a commercial. So there are a few around already that provide the service. And then you get a central overview for your group, and you can have a look in the Treasury Department, for example, what's happening inside your group company and inside your group companies and entities. This gives you a perfect chance to also monitor processes and monitor what's happening. And as an example, at Lufthansa, I noticed that one company happened to the numbers of non-straight-through processes went up from one month to another, and I saw it because of the e-invoicing and the e-billing, and so I could go back to them and ask what's happening, because the number was quite significant and was expensive as well. And then they explained to me it's a new colleague, and he didn't know yet what to do, so they could really look into it and change it and save money for everybody. So this is also, again, it's not a cost, it's also a process issue here, which can be covered and can be solved with that. And if you receive a global or a centralized e-billing, you can basically cover most of the challenges we talked about before. And you get a reporting, easy report you can hand on to over to your management. It shows the share of wallet one specific bank has in the overall context. And yeah, the analysis of your bank relationships get much more comprehensive and easy to interpret. So this is also a quality topic here. And as you mentioned, the regulation in the US, the FBAR and others that come with that. I mean, if you have a bank account management system, this is perfect to add a billing solution to that, because then you can combine both, and you have information on both issues and ease the pain of reporting those details to the regulators. And so this is the idea behind it, to improve your bank relationships and get insights in your cost scenario and see what's happening between you and your banks and inside your group company. So that's the idea behind it. And we call it bank fee management. I guess in the US it's more bank fee analysis. It's much more common, but it's basically the same, just a different name. So that's how it should be in the new world, I called it. And also, if you use a SaaS solution, software as a service, it's easy to implement, no upfront costs or having host anything on your servers, and hire some consultants for the implementation phase. It's an easy start and easy plug-in, and off you go and receive the files from your banks. And to give you, those of you who don't receive e-invoicing or electronic billing in outside the US, the idea was to give you first, some first steps, some encouragement to go to your bank and talk to the guys at the bank side and convince them to provide you with some BSB data, be it in the EDI format or in the CAMT 086 format, doesn't matter. We even heard of banks that provide Excel spreadsheets that can be imported into a software that doesn't hurt, at least at the beginning, to start with that, and then you have an overview about the bank services. And then you can check and analyze the errors if there are any, and I bet there are some, and that just happens because of the decentralized billing engines that many banks still have deployed within their organization. So this is something It helps you track the errors and find out about it and talk to your bank to get a reimbursement. And it's all at the push of a button. It's not like you in your 3M times, Tom, to go through the invoice line by line. I mean, if you do that for 2,800 price items, how long did it take you?
Yeah, it took me a long time. I mean, I would spend a couple hours a month on it. Sometimes with, just checking everything and it was okay. So, but you still had to invest the time. Yeah,
and if I consider do that, if I would have considered doing that in my Lufthansa times, I mean, we had a couple of hundred bank accounts in the U.S. only, so that would have taken me ages to complete that task without any electronic device, I guess. So, and if you do that electronically, you would be amazed. I mean, at least I was amazed when I saw the first results of our electronic billing, and this was just really interesting to see that some price items hadn't been applied correctly for the last 5 years, and accidentally, of course, but still, that's how it was, and nobody saw it in the past. So if you take the data from your bank, go to a vendor and ask them to do a trial period maybe and check on the data and get a trial version of the solution to see how it works. I'm quite sure you'd be amazed how easy it is and how fast you get results from that analysis. And of course, as we talked about it, the result is an optimization not only on the cost side, but also on the inside processes and to monitor the group's treasury departments if they're not centralized, especially, but also if you have a centralized treasury, you need to know what's happening inside your treasury world. And I only can recommend all treasurers to form some kind of working groups in the respective countries or cross-country, doesn't matter. I know that a few companies in Germany, Switzerland, and Austria put together a petition this year and sent it out to I think 18 global banks. I think it was 15 large corporations who asked for a centralized and electronic billing of bank service charges. And this creates, as far as I heard, still creates some rumor on the bank side, because they didn't really expect to get that massive pressure from the corporate side now. In the meantime, again, as we saw in the beginning, it used to be no business case for many banks, but now in more and more RFPs, this is a topic which is required on the corporate side. So this is now changing as well, and this I can only recommend this to try to form an alliance, kind of alliance, and go to your banks and talk to them and convince them, because it's in both interests. And also, like Tom, it's great that you're here, because the AFP plays an important role, and I guess that many countries have their own associations locally, and I also can only recommend to talk to them, and because most of the times banks and corporates are organized together in that association, and it's a perfect platform to discuss this topic and to find ways to improve the situation for everybody. And also, just a little note from my side, I'm going to put up a group in LinkedIn and Xing about this topic in December, so feel free to join or send me an email. It's on my profile in the next couple of days about this topic. So as we are almost it's almost 4 o'clock, just to give a short outlook about the topics we still need to touch or that needs attention from the corporate side. Again, the challenges. Also, the first thing is something you already mentioned, Tom, lifting fees. And this is something that's really annoying, and I can only my example from my experience was, if you are an airline and you need to pay your fuel, for example, in a country like Kazakhstan or Russia or some distant country, and you pay, most of the time you pay US dollars, and you send that from a US bank account to a bank account in that country. Most of the time it's even the same banking group, but then you get lots of lifting charges taken away from the amount. And the vendor says, okay, why don't you pay me in full, and I don't give you fuel anymore, which is quite critical for an airline, for example. So, and this is not really an optimal situation there, and then because then what happens is that companies overpay their invoices by a certain amount, which they don't know in advance, of course. So this is a nightmare for auditors to see that invoices are overpaid on purpose just to avoid these situations with the vendors. So this is something that really needs to be taken care of on the bank side, because this is really annoying and not really state of the art anymore. It's a bank-to-bank relationship, and the corporate doesn't has a chance to influence it, to negotiate it, and he doesn't even get an invoice. So this should be something that the bank takes care of. Of course, I mean, as a corporate, I'm willing to pay for a good service, but I want to negotiate it, I want to see it on an invoice, and I want to know about it in advance, of course. So this is, at least from my perspective at the moment, the biggest challenge for cash management for the bank sector at the moment, besides others. And then, of course, we have EBAM, the electronic bank account management, which, as many of you know, the process of opening or changing bank or closing bank accounts or changing signatory powers for your employees is really basically all paperwork and snail mail sending around to the banks and back and forth. So this is something we should also take a look into on the corporate and the bank level, because it's again, it has advantages for both sides. And now that Swift has offered made the 15, I think it's 15 or 14 XML messages that cover those processes regarding the bank account management. This is a perfect starting point, a perfect ideal solution to start, I mean, country by country, trying to convert the manual process into an electronic state-of-the-art process. And then, as you also mentioned, Tom, other services in the cash management area, like guarantees or interests, should also be electronically invoiced in the hopefully soon future, to get an overview about basically all banks charges, bank service charges that are being paid to the bank. And then other small things like audit confirmation, they can all, in theory, they could be sent by the bank in an XML format and save all the pain for the auditors by collecting all the statements at the end of the year and so on. So this is also something that could be tackled. And then I only can, again, convince corporates, if they see some resistance on the bank side, I mean, just try to convince them, because, again, it has advantages for both sides. With regards to the time, I mean, I'm going to switch that, or no, jump over that. This is the EBAM topic, because this is how it should be, it could be, with a standardized solution. If you want to look into it, I can only recommend you to look in the download version of the presentation, which has all the details, much more than what's shown here, to give you an overview about what's possible in the meantime and what's a solution that could be the future. So summing up from my side, I guess it also covers your main items, Tom. Transparency is an advantage for both sides. For the corporate, because it covers the main aspects of Treasury and enables Treasury to be strategic, as well as a short-term tactical, and improve their relationship with the banks. And also the banks, they can improve their cultural and their corporate relationship. And it is a business case for them, and also compliance issues that can be covered and can be avoided in the future. So this is also something that should be taken into account. And I'm going to jump here. This is something I just wanted to add, but we can skip that. And as in the beginning, we began with the cultural change and the quote from a big bank about how they think about it. And this is now what I've seen lately in the past couple of weeks, that banks come to their corporates and offer them, and also see an increased interest in e-invoices. And they develop this topic now internally, and no matter what the cost side is, so they change that view as well. And they see this as a good service they can provide to the customers to increase the quality of the relationship. And so this is really a change we've seen lately, and I think that's good news. And also from the corporate side, again, I heard from a few corporates now that banks actively approach them and offer trust, or tell the corporates that they are able to provide that. So this is now something that's changing as well. and yeah, I think also that's a good sign. So this is the basic input from my side, and many of you might know this comic strip, but I just had to show it because it perfectly sums up the situation here, and it's something you should avoid. I'll let you read through it before I comment on it. So talking to your banks is essential again, and this scenario that's shown here, of course, should be avoided, but I guess that's quite clear. But it's a nice little funny aspect of it because it quite touches the topic. So if you have any questions, we can try to touch them now for the last couple of minutes in the Q&A in the chat section, or also feel free to send me an email or send Tom an email about any questions you might have to when I answer us, and we'll be happy to get back to you with hopefully some answers. And for now, let me say that it has been a real pleasure to do this webinar with you guys, and I'm curious if there are going to be some questions now for the next couple of minutes.
Yep, we certainly do have a few questions that have come in for both you, Martin, and Tom as well. And the first question that I will pose to you from a participant was if you can actually provide more information on the working group and how, as a corporate, someone can get involved.
Okay, the working group was basically in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. I started that I think 4 years ago. I'm quite sure it still exists. So if somebody is interested, just send me an email. I'll forward that to my former colleague and include that in the next upcoming meeting. I think something is planned next spring or summer. I'm already going to join that, so that's no big deal. Happy to provide that information. Okay,
wonderful. Going back to something that was mentioned earlier, someone has a question. If bank fees here refer to direct fees charged or indirect remuneration in terms of margins?
I can try to address that a little bit, and maybe Martin, you can chime in as well. But in terms of how the U.S. service codes are put in place, they're really geared more towards direct fees. And that's only because it increases the transparency. Likewise, when we did the global service fees, we tried to incorporate as much of the direct fees as well. But Martin, in your terms of a European aspect, do you see the indirect as well?
Yeah, it's a good question because it touches the one quote I showed in the beginning that somebody told me he was really happy that he didn't pay any bank charges. So, I mean, I only can convince anybody or encourage everybody to, as you say, Tom, ask for only direct services, not and direct fees and charges, because otherwise it's totally intransparent. You cannot compare it. And I know some company who is paying a flat fee for their global bank charges, and they're really unhappy because they cannot internally divide that, and they have no overview about anything that's happening. So, and yeah, the float-based pricing that cannot be covered electronically at the moment, at least. And I hope it's going to be history soon, because that's, again, I agree with you, that's not really transparent, not easy to compare as well. So, and yeah, and from a corporate perspective, I mean, it's essential, or I mean, it should be clear that if you want to, if you use a service and you pay for it, you're going to know how much it is. And with the float-based pricing, you cannot really tell. It's not really possible. At least it's not easy.
A related and follow-up question is, in general, third-party fees are very vague. Is there any way to obtain transparent third-party fees?
Well, that's something, it's also a good point, because I can only confirm that, and it's really annoying, to be honest. And for my personal experience, I can say my former company, we negotiated with our banks, at least for Europe, to pay a fixed fee for lifting charges. And so the bank had a shadow book accounting for that purpose in our name, and they collected all the fees that they paid to the third-party banks, and then every year we monitored them, and we made an average pricing about that. So that way we knew in advance how much it is, if the direct clearing is not possible, and at least we got some information about it. And that's one thing that could be a solution for other countries as well. But it depends on the banks, of course, and this is something the corporate community should, especially in Europe and also in the US, because it's the dollar that is also causing a lot of pain, should address to that bank and find a solution of avoiding that pain, because it is painful and it totally dilutes the accounting processes. And if you have an optimized accounting or service shared service center, for example, it totally dilutes the optimization of it, because you have to manually do the booking and rebook it and send an invoice again and send in payment again. So this is something that has to be addressed, or should be addressed, to the banks in the big countries at least.
All right, we have time for one more question. The final question that we're going to answer right now is, how often are the updates for the global service codes updated?
Yeah, that's actually an excellent question, and there isn't a set time frame necessarily. It's all dependent on, so 2011 we came out with the codes. 2012 we did a soft update to the codes, actually late 2012, early 2013, but they're updated when we hear enough, if there's enough critical mass in terms of what needs to be updated, and then we'll identify, if there's enough changes, then we'll organize a task force, or we'll work with the prior task force to do that. So on average, even in the US, our 2013 version wasn't updated since 2008. But then the year prior to that, it was 2004. So is it a 4 to 5 year cycle? Not necessarily. With the global service codes and the codes being much more larger in scope, there's much more services, quite frankly, that could be fit within that, within the breadth and depth of those codes. So, could we have another update in a year? Possibly. It all depends on what we hear from users, what we hear from the prior task force members, pain points that we hear from members, or people using the codes, not necessarily members, but I would say it's probably on average, in U.S. codes are probably a 3 to 4 year cycle, whereas the global codes could be maybe a 2 to 3 year cycle. But that's just a guesstimate based on what feedback we receive.
Well, that's a good thing. I think I didn't mention it, because the global service codes aren't used by many banks at the moment, at least. But that doesn't really matter, because you can also ask your vendors to provide that information and buy it from the AFP, and then the vendor integrates that in that's at least how we do it, integrates it in this solution, and then the customer and the corporate can do the mapping. It's a one-time effort, of course, but then you have a mapping against the global service codes, and you can match the local pricing of all your banks against this global service codes, and it's a nice and perfect way to compare services across the world. So this is something that's really helpful, and I think it's going to pick up next year as soon as the CPAD issue hopefully has eased for many European customers. So at least that's what I hope to see.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Martin and Tom, for your highly insightful presentation today. I am afraid we're out of time, and if we didn't manage to answer your questions, we'll certainly try and get back to you via email. Once again, I would like to thank CIS for their sponsorship of today's webinar. And in the next few days, you will be receiving the recording as well as the complete slides for your review. Thank you to all of the participants for attending today, and we look forward to welcoming you to another GT webinars in the future. Have a wonderful afternoon or day to all.
Perfect. Same for me, and thanks to Tom and Terika. Thank you, and all the best.
Thank you.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.